Okay, so tonight we have another installment of Jewish Heroes, and tonight we're going to speak about two amazing Jewish heroes, if we have time. First of all, the Ben Ish Chai. Ben Ish Chai, his Yosef was today, this Wednesday, it was last night, and today was the Yosef Ben Ish Chai, Yosef Chaim of Baghdad. That is the capital of Iraq, and back then it was known as Bavel, and so he passed away in 1909, and he was the amazing leader, very, very special, very, very amazing, very holy, and there's really a lot to learn from him. And then on Sunday night, Monday, Chai Elul is also the yahrzeit of the Maharal of Prague. The Maharal of Prague is, unfortunately, he's most well known for a story that probably never existed about his creating a golem, this Frankenstein-like figure that he created from clay and pumped life into him, and he was the one that saved the Jews of Prague from different blood libels. He lived 500 years ago, and so the truth is the Maharal in Prague was an amazing leader, despite the fact that this golem probably never existed, which we'll get to, but that's what's on schedule for tonight. So we'll start with the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai of Yosef Chaim of Baghdad. So he was living in Iraq. He was from a very, very, very good family, very holy family. His father was a Rav, but the story of his really connection to Torah really started when he was 7 years old. When he was 7 years old, so he was playing with his sister, and he fell into some pit. And when he fell into the pit, he was scared for his life, and they were trying to reach him, and they couldn't reach him, and they're trying to throw something in, and it just wasn't working. So, in his distress, the 7-year-old kid, so he turned to God, and he said, Hashem, if you get me out of this, I promise you, I will devote my life to Torah study. And then miraculously, he got saved, he got out, and he kept his word. He knew that Hashem listened to his prayers, and it's amazing. It's wonderful when the person really feels on their skin that Hashem is listening to them. So it can really make a big difference. And that was the beginning of the story of the Ben Ish Chai. That's how he really started to be different than his peers and really to rise to greatness. And it's really because of this commitment that he made. So when he was only 25 years old, so his father passed away, and they deemed him to be fit to be the successor of his father as the rabbi as the person who's giving the shir. Interestingly, he never had an official title. He never had an official. He was never called the rabbi of Baghdad. He was called the rabbi of the rabbis. He was called the Hakim. He was called the wise man, the Chacham. But he was never actually. He never actually held a paid position as rabbi, and he was actually against taking a salary for being rabbi. So not only did he not take salary for being rabbi, but he refused to even take donations for publishing his books. So he was really, really adamant that he shouldn't benefit from his being a rabbi, from his learning Torah, and his money, his making a living, he got from being a partner in his brother's business. That his brother had some kind of business, and so he was part of that.
So he worked full time?
No, so he didn't work. He was learning full time and teaching full time, but he was a partner in the business. He had investments. He invested in his brother's business, and he was not working at all. But because he had these investments in his brother's business, meaning that he inherited some kind of shares in his brother's business. So that's how he had a living, and he refused to take any care from his community. Never take money. It it wasn't that he inherited money, invested it. He sort of inherited the business. So that's how he supported himself. Like in modern day times, that I think a model of this, like who is quite amazing, that it's very, very uncommon, is Rabbi Zachariah Wallerstein. Rabbi Zachariah Wallerstein, who passed away not long ago, about a year ago. So he did amazing things. Like he had a lot of institutions and a lot of schools and a lot of programs that he started, and he never took a salary. And he had his business, and even though he did so much, he did a lot of fundraising, but he didn't take a cent for himself. And that was so. The Ben Ish Chai was even bigger than that, because at least Rabbi Wallerstein at least took donations for the different stuff that he was doing, and the Ben Ish Chai didn't even take donations. So that's mamish amazing. That very, very, very. What?
Who's Wallerstein, you said?
You can look him up. He was
Person?
yeah, he was modern day. He passed away a year ago. So, from the time that he was 25, so he was amazing teacher, and he would give 2 big classes every day. For that, right after he would wake up every day, he was a Sephardi. I should have mentioned that he was part of the Sephardi community, and he was one of the greatest Sephardi leaders of all time. And so Sephardim, they're very into davening very early. So he would wake up at sunrise every day, and after davening at sunrise, after davening at Vatikan, so he would give a class every single day for an hour and a half. And the first class would be halacha. So he would give a lot of classes to halacha, and every 4 years, so he would finish everything that he wanted to teach. He would finish like the entire cycle of the halacha that was relevant to his people, and then he would make a big meal, a big festive meal that everybody would celebrate that he had finished going through the Shulchan Aruch. And then in the afternoon, he would give for an hour every single day. He would give on ideas in the Parshat HaShavua, and he would give ideas about Amunah and Musar and self-improvement and Midot and things like that. So basically the morning was the more serious, and the afternoon was the more light for the simple people that couldn't understand halacha. But it's amazing that he gave this class for over 50 years until he passed away, and he never stopped. He never stopped. Not only did he never stop, but what was unique about his classes was that he never repeated himself. Okay, that for 50 years he would teach for 2.5 hours every single day. Now, besides this, so on Shabbat, so he would give a class for 3 hours straight every Shabbat, and this was he had amazing position. Like the way that people looked at him in Baghdad, so was very amazing. They had so much respect for him. He was simply a holy man, and he was also a very straight man. And I think they appreciated the fact that he felt a responsibility to them, and he didn't want anything from them. And he was able to really connect to them in a very personal way, in a very deep way, and he had a very tremendous positive effect on his community. That amazingly, that during his lifetime as leader, so everybody was into Judaism. That everybody was keeping Shabbat, everybody was keeping kosher, and to the extent that they had said that if he would be a bigger leader, then Mashiach would just come, because anybody who is under his auspices so just couldn't help but fall in love with Judaism. So it was just an amazing thing that they had said about him that if he had been a Rav during the times of the temple, then the temple would never have been destroyed, because that nobody would be able to hold themselves. Nobody would be able to go and sin if they had the Ben Ish Chai as the rabbi, because he had this way of being able to just pierce people's souls and pierce their hearts and really connect with them on a very deep level. And people really, really accepted what he said and were inspired by his words. So for over 50 years, so he was teaching. He was teaching 2.5 hours a day and 3 hours every Shabbos. And from his Shabbat sermons came the most of his teachings for that became popular. And that's the word Ben Ish Chai is a collection of his sermons on Shabbat. And he writes there that the way to speak to people is that you have to make things interesting. You have to talk to people on their level. You can't just talk to them what you think is interesting. You have to talk to them on what they think is interesting. And that's why he would always put into his stories, put into his sermons a lot of stories, a lot of simple ideas that people can connect to, just about being a good person, about improving your character traits, and then along the way he would talk about halachot, and he would make sure to talk about halachot which are relevant, which are everyday things, and speak to it in a language that's going to talk to them. It's really from these drashot that what's known as the classical Sephardi way of giving drashas today really comes from him. That he really invented this style of speaking, where there's a lot of jokes and a lot of stories and a lot of just being on the same level as the people, and he really developed this style of giving speeches. So it was really innovative and really changing the tone of making Judaism really accessible to the masses, and that's really what he was doing. Now there was an amazing thing. 4 times a year, so he would give a special drasha that in his usual shul he would daven on Shabbos, so there was room for about 1,000 people. But there was a bigger shul in Baghdad that it was much bigger. I don't remember exactly how many people, but thousands of space, thousands of seats. And so 4 times a year he would give the sermon there. That was Shabbos Shuvah, Shabbos Zachar before Pesach, the Shabbos before Shavuos, and the Shabbos before Pesach, Shabbos Hagadol. And during these 4 times, so he would give special speeches, and the entire thousands of people would come to his drashas. And there was a strange thing that happened, that although thousands of people would come to his drashas, everyone was able to hear him, even though it was Shabbat and he wasn't using a microphone. But nevertheless, everyone was able to hear him. And this is an amazing miracle that nobody even noticed until he passed away. Because right after he passed away, so his son, who's also a great sage in his own right, so he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. So the first Shabbos Hagadol after his father passed away, so he probably was Shabbos Shuvah, because he passed away Yud Gimel Elul, which was today. So Shabbos Shuvah. So he got up in the big shul in Baghdad, and everybody came. Everyone was excited because they were fulfilling the tradition of coming to hear the drasha. And as soon as he started speaking, so everyone was in dismay that they couldn't hear a word he was saying. The people that in the front of the shul were able to hear him, and that's it. And everyone in the rest of the shul, certainly everyone that came out, that was outside of the shul, there was even people outside the shul, they were able, during his lifetime, that he was able to hear this, and only then did he realize that it was actually a supernatural thing, that for these past 50 years, that everyone was able to hear him. Okay, and it was not that he had a secret microphone. It was not that he had a super opera voice. It was simply a miracle. It was simply a miracle. And his son, as he was speaking and as he was realizing that what was going on, so he said that this is really the biggest eulogy that I can say to my father, that when my father would speak, so it was simply God speaking through my father's throat. And I have no explanation as to how we were always able to hear it. Okay, so that's just an amazing thing that would go on constantly. Now, Israel was something which was close to his heart, and he would speak constantly about the holiness of Israel in his speeches. And there's something that he would that he would support. He would encourage people to move to Israel. Towards the end of his life, when he was, I'm sorry, not towards the end of life, when he was 34 years old, so he actually managed to come to Israel himself, and he visited a lot of holy places, and so one of the most meaningful things that happened to him was when he was in the north, and he went to, I'm sorry?
It was when
He went to the north, to the Galil, and over there, so he went to the kever of Benayahu ben Yehoyada. Okay, Benayahu ben Yehoyada was one of the people on the team of David HaMelech, and he was a great sage, and he was supportive of David HaMelech, and so when he was at this grave, so he felt a very deep connection, and he stayed there for many days. He stayed at this gravestone, right? It's not like unheard of, right? To stay at a gravestone, like nowadays the only grave that people stay for days is Meron. Like it's a chill to stay in Meron. But he stayed at this kever for many days, and he reports that he felt an amazing connection there. He felt an amazing that it was revealed to him many secrets of Torah, many secrets of Kabbalah, just like was able to download, he was able to connect there in a very deep way, and he understood very clearly that his soul was connected to the soul of Ben Yehoyada. So after this discovery, so he realized that he was Ben Yehoyada. So he named all of the books that he published, he named them after different things connected to Ben Yehoyada. Okay, so one of his books he named Benayahu. One of his books he named Ben Yehoyada. One of his books he named Mikav Tziel, because the David HaMelech praises Benayahu ben Yehoyada as being Mikav Tziel. Also, David HaMelech praises Benayahu ben Yehoyada as being Ben Ish Chai. So that's his most famous thing. Also, his responsa he named Rav Pa'alim, because David HaMelech praises Benayahu ben Yehoyada as being a Rav Pa'alim, a person of great deeds. So all of the names of his books, so he named after this identity, this Torah personality of Benayahu ben Yehoyada, who was like basically unknown, like he was like just a scriptural figure as being one of the people who was on the team of David HaMelech, but the Ben Ish Chai, Rav Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, so he understood that he was a reincarnation of sorts of Benayahu, and it's through this that he was able to understand that this is who he is, and what he needs to do in this world. His connection to Israel wasn't just in the fact that he visited there, but he supported the Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael, and he would constantly tell the people of his community, to support the settlement of Israel and to support those who lived here in Israel. And it's because of him that there was a certain Gevir, his name was Yosef Avram mi Calcutta, that this Yosef Avram, so he wanted to build a hospital in Israel, and the Ben Ish Chai convinced him that it's better for you to use your money to, instead of building a hospital, it's better for you to use your money to build a yeshiva. It'll be better for you if you make a difference in the souls of the Jewish people than if you make a difference in the bodies of the Jewish people. So it's because of this that this Yosef Avram of Calcutta, so he built the famous yeshiva of Parat Yosef, which is in the Old City, and it's the steps going down to the Kotel is the famous yeshiva, and so it was built through the encouragement and through the inspiration of the Ben Ish Chai that this yeshiva came to be. Okay. Now, there's an interesting book that there's a whole discussion about where it comes from. So in the Sefer Ben Ish Chai, so he quotes this book numerous times called Sefer Torah Lishma. Sefer Torah Lishma. So besides bringing it in Sefer Ben Ish Chai in his drashas on Shabbos, so also in his responsa in Rav Palim he brings this total of 7 times, and in his responsa, so he mentions the name of the author of Torah Lishma as being Yechezkel Kachli, and he writes about the fact that it was written in 1682, which is 300 years, 200 something years before him, and that he has a manuscript in his house. Okay, so the thing is that everyone was wondering when they found this mention about the Sefer Torah Lishma from Yechezkel Kachli. So it's very interesting that it was never ever mentioned ever before in Jewish history. That no rabbi had ever mentioned this book, and nobody. It's simply he's the only one ever to mention this book. So to mention this book, to mention this author, it's an author that never existed. There's no biography of him. He was like nobody's ever heard of him, and yet the Ben Ish Chai is talking about him as if he was like a normal person, to quote, a person who's trustworthy and a person that exists. And it's like people were intrigued by the fact that, like, how are you quoting this book that nobody's ever heard of? Yes. So there was a contemporary of the Ben Ish Chai named Rav Avram Chaim Adis that found this very, very fascinating, and he noticed something interesting, that the name Yechezkel is the same numerical value as the name Yosef. It's 156, and the name Kachli is the same numerical value as the name Chaim. Okay, that's 68. So he came up with this idea that perhaps Rabbi Yosef Chaim himself, the Ben Ish Chai, was himself the author of the Sefer Torah Lishma, and he was simply writing it anonymously, and with this pseudonym of this Yechezkel Kachli that had lived 200 years before him, as a sign of humility, that he didn't want to take credit for this amazing work of responsa, and so he just made it up. He made up this responsa, and it was his own handwriting, and just he wanted to just not take the credit for the beauty of this Torah, and that would make a lot of sense from the name, because Torah Lishma. What does Torah Lishma mean? Torah for its own sake. What does it mean for its own sake? It means as opposed to ulterior motives, or in other words, that sometimes a person could publish a work with the intention of becoming famous, with the intention of getting credit, that people are going to say, "Wow, I just saw your book. That's amazing. I've never seen such amazing works. I've never read such amazing Torah chidushim." And so, what do you mean Torah Lishma? That Torah just for its own sake, for the greatness of the Torah, and not for my own sake. And so that would really make a lot of sense, that he named it Torah Lishma because he wanted to bring forth Torah in the world only for the Torah's sake, without having any personal gain. So how would he bring that there should be Torah in the world without any personal gain? Because he's not going to admit that he wrote it. So this was the idea of Rav Chaim Adis. So he, after he figured out this, cracked the code, so to speak, so he asked the Ben Ish Chai numerous questions, so like simply asked him halachic questions that were going on, and like things that he just wanted to know the answers to. And at the end of his questions, he said, and also I want to know who is the actual author of the Sefer Torah Lishma. And so consistently, like 3 or 4 times, so Rav Chaim Adis, after cracking the code, so he asked him this list of his questions, of different questions on Shabbat and Tefillah and whatever, and every single time, so the Ben Ish Chai would answer all of those questions, and the last question, who is the actual author of Torah Lishma, he would always ignore and never ask, never responded, never like gave any attention to this last question. So this, in his eyes, this was a very clear answer that yes, in fact, the Ben Ish Chai was the author of the Torah Lishma, and I'm aware of the fact that today Rav Yaakov Hillel, a great Kabbalist and follower of the Ben Ish Chai, so he is also of the opinion that the Sefer Torah Lishma is in fact from the Ben Ish Chai, and it makes a difference because we have copies, we have the whole version of the Torah Lishma today, and the question is how much weight does it have? Because if that how much we should trust a certain work has a lot to do with who wrote it, meaning that like the opinions of somebody depends on who's the person having the opinions, and especially what should we do if there's contradictions between what it says in Torah Lishma and what it says in other books of the Ben Ish Chai. So he is of the opinion that we should treat that we should treat the Sefer Torah Lishma as being actually from the Ben Ish Chai, and therefore it has a lot of weight. Okay. Another interesting way that they cracked that there's certain inconsistency in the Sefer Torah Lishma is the fact that a couple of times in the Sefer Torah Lishma, so he quotes from the Sefer called B'Samim Rosh. Now, what's interesting about the Sefer B'Samim Rosh? The Sefer B'Samim Rosh is itself a enigmatic work that it was written as tshuvas from the Rosh, from Rabbeinu Asher, that lived in medieval times, approximately 1,000 years ago. So the Sefer B'Samim Rosh was published as manuscripts of the Rosh, of Rabbeinu Asher, who was one of the leading Ashkenazi Rishonim, in Germany, and so the thing is that it came out after the passing of the Ben Ish Chai, so it became known that the Sefer B'Samim Rosh was actually a fraud. It was actually a fraud. Okay, like just to get the timeline. So the Ben Ish Chai passed away in 1906, so he was living in the 1800s. Okay, the Sefer B'Samim Rosh was published in the 1800s, but it was published as a manuscript from the year 1000, from the Rosh. And the Sefer Torah Lishma was published, I mean, it was mentioned in the 1800s, but it was quoted as being a manuscript from the 1600s. Okay, so it would make sense that if the Ben Ish, whoever was writing this, so he was writing it as somebody as if it was somebody who was living in the 1600s. So he needed to make sure that he's not quoting something that was only like either it was real, and if it was real, so he only had things available that were only available in the 1600s, or things that were not available in the 1600s, so he couldn't have had any connection to. So the thing is that the Tshuvas HaRosh, this B'Samim Rosh, so in the 1900s, it became clear that it was actually a fraud. It didn't exist in the year 1000, and really it was simply written in the 1800s by some psychopath that was writing it as if it was written 1,000 years earlier.
When you say a psychopath, you mean just a guy who's...
No, I don't mean evil. I just mean like psychopath is the wrong word. A psychotic person. A psychotic person. That psychopath means that he doesn't have a conscience. I don't mean he's evil. He's just crazy. That he's psychotic in the fact that it's crazy to write this whole work and then convince the world that it was written by somebody 1,000 years ago. That's crazy. That's like mentally ill. So the same thing happened in the 1900s with the Yerushalmi and Kachim. That some like super genius crazy person, he composed, he wrote an entire tractates of Jerusalem Talmud on Kachim and things that have to do with the temple, and that we never had. And he pretended that he found this manuscript, and really he was just inventing the whole thing. And like there was a whole thing, and like in like Jewish history, that different gedolim, they were able to see through his lie and see through his fraud, and it's crazy. It just intrigues me, like what would go through a person's mind to want to do this, to work years and years and years to imitate the way that the Jerusalem Talmud was written, and to to fabricate a Jerusalem Talmud. And so the same thing was with the Besamim Reish, that somebody just spent years and years and years to fabricate like things. You have to be a Torah giant to be able to think in the way that the Rosh would think, and people would buy it, and people bought it. And in fact, the Ben Ish Chai himself bought it. But the thing is that afterwards, when we found out that it was really a fraud, then we realized that, hey, if the Torah Lishma is actually living in the 1600s and is quoting the Besamim Reish, so that actually doesn't make any sense, because in the 1600s nobody knew about the Besamim Reish, because the book was fabricated in the 1800s. So this is another proof that there's something fishy about the Sefer Torah Lishma, because he's quoting a book that he's claiming to exist in the 1600s, and he's quoting a book that we now know didn't exist in the 1600s. Okay, so this also points to the fact that there's just something fishy going on, which would lead us to the conclusion that Rav Addis was correct, that it was really himself, that really the reason why nobody heard of him before this is because the Sefer Torah Lishma was actually by himself. He actually wrote it himself, and he wanted that there should be Torah in the world that he gets no credit for. Unfortunately, he failed because they saw through his.
Why exactly did he lie about the year, though? Just to make it less obvious?
I think he wanted to hide behind something as if it was real. So, like, you think because if you claim to be somebody that's alive today, then they would ask, who is it? And like, so if you, by making your lie further away, so then it's more likely that people will buy it. Okay. But it didn't work, and historians foiled his plans. And but I think it's a fascinating idea. The fact that he wanted to share Torah with the world without having any fame from it, without having any credit from it, I think is a beautiful idea. Okay, the last thing around the life of the Ben Ish Chai is his death and his burial. Okay, now he was the Rav of Baghdad, and so he was buried in Baghdad apparently, and thousands of people came to his funeral. Because he was so beloved. He was even beloved by the non-Jews, and the non-Jews came to him as a source of judgment, of just court cases. And in fact, there's some crazy story that when he was traveling to Israel, so there's this story that he before he traveled to Israel, he made up with the Arab that was going to take them, that he would not travel on Shabbat, because the Ben Ish Chai refused to travel on Shabbat. And so apparently he made him sign a contract that he's not going to travel on Shabbat. But when push came to shove, so the Arab refused to stop. And the Ben Ish Chai would not give in. He said, no, I am not traveling on Shabbat, and I don't care. And he said, but this is a very dangerous place. Like, there's lots of bandits here. Your life is in danger. I can't stop here. And he says, I don't care. You signed the contract. If you're going to go, so then I don't have to pay you. I'm staying here. I'm not traveling. And so we stayed in this dangerous place. And the Arab with the other travelers, so he kept on going. And so after a couple of hours, he had some like his conscience was bothering him, and so he came back to see what was going on, and he noticed that there was actually this bandit that came into the tent of the Ben Ish Chai and was about to kill him. And then when he came into the Ben Ish Chai's tent, so he screamed and he left. What was the story? So apparently the story was that this bandit, before he became a bandit, so he was non-Jewish, but he brought a case to the Ben Ish Chai, and it was him against the Jew, and the Ben Ish Chai saw through that the Jew was actually lying, and he convinced the Jew. He saw that the Jew was lying, and he realized that the Jew was trying to cheat this non-Jew because he couldn't afford to pay him, and so the Ben Ish Chai himself took his own money to give the Jew to be able to pay the non-Jew the money that he owed, and this non-Jew was so impressed with the straightness of the integrity of the Ben Ish Chai that when he came to rob him and to kill him, so when he saw that this was the man that he was coming to, so he was just in awe of the holiness of the Ben Ish Chai, and so of course he left him alone. So even the non-Jews in Baghdad, so they were amazed and in awe of the greatness and the holiness of the Ben Ish Chai, and so many thousands of people came to his funeral. But the thing is that in Har HaZeisim, here on the Mount of Olives, here in Jerusalem, so there is actually a gravestone that says the following: Ben Ish Chai, Rav Pa'alim, Rabban Shabbat Gedolah. Lefi Edut HaMakubal, Harav Agoin, Rav Avram Adis, the same rabbi, the same Rav Avram Adis that was the one who cracked the code. The Torah Lishma was actually from the Ben Ish Chai. So, Asher Chalam al Havaras Mitasa Mibaval Yerushalayim Har HaZeisim, that he had a dream. He had a dream that the body of the Ben Ish Chai was actually brought from Iraq, from Baghdad, to Jerusalem, and he was actually buried in Jerusalem. And so he had this crazy dream, like the night of the burial, that of some other great Sephardi rabbi, that I think of Katzin, so some of Chaim Shaul Katzin, that he had this crazy dream that the body of the Ben Ish Chai was transported to Har HaZeisim and was buried there. And also, the tombstone continues. The Gam Behokitz Baha Kavran Eitzel Rabbi Tzion Chazan Ubikesh Chatzi Lira Zahav Tmuras Chafiras HaKever. So, Rabbi Chazan that lived in Israel, he was actually they were connected. They were very connected. I believe that they were also relatives, and so the Ben Ish Chai, so he insisted that all of his books be published in Israel, and he even though they had publishing presses in Baghdad in Iraq, but he insisted that all of his books be published in Israel because he wanted to give parnasah. He wanted to give a living, to give business to the people in Israel, because, like we said, he was very into the success of the yeshiva in Israel. So his name was actually not Chazan, but the Ben Ish Chai called him Chazan because he loved his voice, and he always loved for him to be Chazan. But anyway, but so a person came to Rav Chazan in Israel the day after of the funeral of the Ben Ish Chai, and he said that please pay me half a lira. So why should I pay you half a lira? So he said, because I'm a grave digger, and I just dug the grave for the Ben Ish Chai that was just buried there. And he said, what are you talking about? The Ben Ish Chai doesn't live in Israel. And he said, I don't know what to talk about. That a bunch of family members of the Ben Ish Chai, they came to me last night, and he said the Ben Ish Chai needs to be buried in Israel in Har HaZeisim, so please dig his grave, and I can show you where we buried him. And so he said, okay, show me. And he came to Har HaZeisim, and he showed him that there was this freshly dug grave, and they didn't have the audacity to dig it up to see who was actually buried there, but he said, okay, sababa, I'll pay you. And so based on these two testimonies, so apparently there's this claim that the Ben Ish Chai's body was somehow transported to Israel, and we don't really understand how and when, but there is absolutely a gravestone in Har Zaysim that says that Ben Ish Chai is buried there, and there's also a gravestone in Baghdad that says that Ben Ish Chai is buried there. So this is, to this day, going to be a mystery. I am aware of the fact that Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, who was very connected to the Ben Ish Chai, and Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, he looked at himself as the successor of the Ben Ish Chai in a certain sense. That so he claimed that this testimony is not a physical thing, but rather a spiritual thing. That somehow the soul of the Ben Ish Chai was transported to Israel, but not the body. Okay, so as far as we know, that the Ben Ish Chai was only buried in Baghdad and not in Har Zaysim, not in Jerusalem. So this is very fascinating, right? Very, very, very fascinating. Now, what exactly is the legacy of the Ben Ish Chai? So first of all, he was just. I think that the fact that he devoted so much time to teaching was an amazing thing. That the fact that to teach 2.5 hours a day and then 3 hours every Shabbat is unheard of. And he was, and the fact that he was always teaching new stuff is unheard of. He was a super genius. He was known to be the expert on every element of Torah, of whether it's halacha, every single element of halacha. He was the highest authority in monetary law. He was the highest authority in marriage and divorce. He was the highest authority in regular just Shabbos halachas. He was the highest authority in Kabbalah. He was the highest authority in Tanakh. It was like the professor of everything. It's very amazing, just the breadth of his knowledge, and I think the greatest part of his legacy is that he brought Kabbalah into halacha. Because he was such a Kabbalist, because he was such a spiritual person, so he was able to bring the Kabbalistic spiritual side as part of regular everyday halacha. Okay, so in this sense, that he was, because everyone would listen to him, so he made it that this was the accepted approach, that by Sfaradim, that by Sephardi culture, they became very spiritual, they became very into Kabbalah, and it was Rav Ovadia Yosef was really making a revolution against this. The Rav Ovadia Yosef, one of the biggest things that he wanted to do in Sephardi culture was to take Kabbalah away from Sephardi culture, and that's why Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, Zichrono Livracha, that we spoke about a couple of months ago. So one of the things, he looked at himself as the successor of the Ben Ish Chai. He would give a shir on Yud Gimel Elul every year in honor of the Yartzeit of the Ben Ish Chai, and he looked at himself as the successor of the Ben Ish Chai to overturn what Rav Ovadia Yosef was trying to do, to take Kabbalah out of Sephardi culture. So that was basically the biggest thing that he did, and the biggest thing that he represented, and but he was really just an amazing person. The fact that he was so devoted, the fact that he was so honored, the fact that he was able to reach very high spiritual levels, and I think it's amazing that he never took salary for all of his things. And that really shows a very tremendous amount of straightness and really devotion for lishma. Like the concept of lishma, the concept of doing things not to get anything out of it, And then, like we see, like we spoke about in the book Torah Lishma, that he published like with a pseudonym because he didn't want to take credit for it. That's the fact that he wanted to just do it for Torah's sake, for Hashem's sake. I don't want to get anything out of this. I don't want to get any money out of this. I don't want to get any fame out of this. I don't want to get any credit out of this. Just, I want Torah to be promoted in the world. I think that's a really amazing, amazing legacy. That to do things just for its own sake, not to have any personal gain. So that's really, it says in Mishnah Pirkei Avos, Habarech min hakavod, hakavod barech acharav, the person that runs away from honor, so the honor is going to run after him. And that really is the legacy of the Ben Ish Chai. Okay, so for a couple of minutes, let's speak a little bit about the other person that his yahrzeit is coming up, and that's Sunday night. And Monday, Chai Elul is the yahrzeit of the Maharal mi Prague. And this is much earlier. That we're talking about, like the Ben Ish Chai is somebody who was somewhat modern history. That we're talking about 500 years ago, in the 1500s, is the Maharal. He passed away in 1609. Very long life. He lived almost 100 years. Maharal mi Prague. So first of all, I'll put on the table that he's most known for creating this golem. You've heard of this golem effect? Yeah, you heard of the golem effect?
Yeah, I don't know much about it.
So the thing is that the golem of Prague never existed. We know it never existed because it only showed up, traditions about it, 300 years after he passed away. Okay, nobody in the time of the Maharal mi Prague, nobody ever mentioned it. He never mentioned it. Any of his writings, none of the eulogies of the Maharal mi Prague ever mentioned such a thing. So, like that's clear enough that it's clear enough that it never existed. Where these rumors came from is really not clear. I started reading this article. Today that there is somebody that actually claims that perhaps it did exist. It wasn't really a Kabbalistic thing, but perhaps it was something like somebody that had autism, that because there's people with severe autism that they aren't able to talk, but they're able to follow orders, and they're because of their not being connected to society. So it makes sense that he would just take an order from the Maharal and just do it, and not be aware of the fact that he's running into things and I don't know, interesting concept. But anyway, another interesting thing is that the tradition is that at some point that the Golem of Prague started being problematic and that the Maharal wasn't able to control him, so he shut him down and put him in the attic of the Alt Nushal in Prague. Okay, so the thing is that there was always this legend that the Golem Prague is still there in the attic. There's even a legend that there's some Gestapo officer wanted to. It's actually a very fascinating thing that this is true. That it is true that Prague was never, the Nazis never destroyed Prague, because they actually wanted Prague to be a museum city of an extinct people. They wanted to make a museum of the history of Jews in Prague, and that's true. And they collect a lot of artifacts in Prague, but it's not documented that the one Gestapo officer. So he went to the attic of the Alt Nushal, and then he was immediately killed by the golem. So the thing is that the Alt Nushal was renovated in 1883, and there was no remnants of any golem there. Now, interestingly, the fact that he wasn't found in the attic of the Alt Nushal, so there's another testimony. In 1907, So there was an article written in the St. Louis Jewish Voice that there was the rabbi of Prague at the time in 1907 brings a testimony that the gabbai of the shul before that had buried the golem of Prague in the cemetery earlier, like decades earlier, and that's why he was no longer in the attic of the shul. So the people who are actually into this myth, into this legend, is in Chabad. In Chabad, they're apparently into this. That's because the Riats told his daughter, the Rebbetzin Gur Aryeh, that he himself went into the attic of the Altner Shul in Prague, and there he saw this man that was the golem, and that was buried in the attic. So because the Frierdiker Rebbe claimed to have seen it, and that's what he told his daughter, so that's why apparently in Chabad they do believe this. The thing is that the Frierdiker Rebbe, he was only born in 1880, and we know that in 1883 that there was nothing there. So apparently, it would appear that the story just didn't happen. I imagine that he was just telling a story to his daughter, just because it was a legend that everybody was going around, and he was just I don't call it lying when you're telling your children stories that I went to Prague and I saw the golem of Prague. I don't think that's called lying. That's just called being a good father and making your kids excited. And I think that she took it too far, and she thought that he was saying something hysterical, and he was just trying to get her to go to sleep or something like that.
Does he just
So,
not to do that?
I'm sorry?
Does that teach us not to lie to our children? In the child, the classic one is where do I come from, Dad? And then they say oh, we found you with all the patch or the.
I think I certainly do it all the time. I just make up stories to my kids, but I think they understand that I'm joking. So I think the issue over here was simply a communication issue, not an honesty issue. Okay. So
we do know that Elanavi has come to people at times that were worthy, so it could be that it's not a steerer.
we're not talking about Elianavi.
No, I'm talking the same idea. And maybe he was buried, and for whatever reason, the image or the look was there. He did see something. We don't know. Could be this. Could be that was. But to say he didn't say when he was at Tom Rock, he say could be he did. We don't know. We can say. I feel it could be either way.
You're saying it could be that he saw some image there. Okay, maybe. But
Who knows?
uh-huh.
Yeah, if you ever see the Vinci Code, then it could be some.
So anyways, that's we know that we do know that the most famous thing about the Maharal Prague, the golem. So that's really a legend that has that's actually from the Maharal. We're pretty sure that's not true. So what can we say about the Maharal? So first of all, Maharal was a very wise man. He was known to be, besides being very, very knowledgeable in Torah, so he was also very knowledgeable in many other things, many other sciences. He was, I forgot his name. He was in communication with some big scientists at the time, the 1500s. Okay, it's slipping my mind. And the emperor at the time, Rudolf II, who was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, so he asked to meet with the Maharal Prague because he had heard the Maharal Prague was such a wise man. The situation in Prague was very interesting. It was very spiritual. It was very spiritual. Like Rudolf II himself was into mysticism. They were very into it was like a Nachlaodi kind of vibe. They were into alchemy. They were into astrology, and even the emperor himself was into these pseudosciences. Is that the right word? Like pseudosciences. And so it was it gave room for a lot of spirituality, and so really the the legacy of the Maharal Prague was in his Torah. He was extremely prolific. He wrote many books. I have at home like a whole shelf of the books of the Maharal Prague, and even though he was very wise in halacha, but he put his efforts into making a place for Agadah. Agadah is the more esoteric parts of Chazal, and he brought out a new method, a new way of learning Agadah, of learning these spiritual passages in Gemara. The Rav Kook was very into the works of the Maharal, and he said that the Maharal really paved the way both for the methods of learning of the Grami Vilna, as well as the methods of learning of Chassidut and the Baal Tanya and the Baal Shem Tov. And so he's really like all of spiritual learning that came about is really had seeds in the words of the Maharal. The Maharal, so he was a contemporary of the Arizal, and apparently he had secrets. Apparently he had a tradition of the secrets of Kabbalah that we don't know where it came from. But he was able to teach the secrets of Torah without telling us that they're secrets. And the way that he spoke was a philosophical language, but yet through this philosophical language he was talking about this metaphysical existence in the world. And so he's really the prototype of learning spirituality in Torah, of the whole spiritual Torah that we have. He wrote many books. He wrote a book on Rashi called Gur Aryeh and Chomesh, and he wrote a book called Gevuras Hashem on Pesach. He wrote a sefer called Tiferes Yisrael and Shavuos. He wrote many books about Midot. He wrote, and everything that he wrote was a very brand new way to learn Agadah. And basically, his most revolutionary thing is that the way to understand the Agadahs in Shas, the way to understand all the Midrashim, that sometimes that they always meant something very deep, and if it doesn't sound normal, it's not supposed to be taken literally. He has a very famous and meaningful quote that there's a famous midrash that says that when Hashem gave us the Torah, that He uprooted Mount Sinai and He held it above our heads, and He said that if you're going to accept the Torah, then good, and if not, then that this is going to be the end of you. I'm going to bury you. And so Maharal writes that anybody who thinks that this is literal is a fool. And rather, what does it mean? It means that He brought us to a state of clarity, that God brought us to a state of clarity that it was completely impossible to not accept the Torah. That it was so clear to us, the authenticity and the truth of the Torah, that this is the true, proper way of life. It became so clear to us that it would be, that to negate the Torah, to not accept the Torah, would be as if you're not accepting that 2 and 2 is 4. Which is... It would be as impossible as not accepting that 2 and 2 is 4. Okay, and that's what Chazal are trying to say. That's what they're trying to bring out by this metaphor of picking up Har Sinai and holding it above our heads. They're trying to bring out this idea that it was completely forced, that we didn't have a choice. But we shouldn't. But anybody that thinks that everybody thinks that it's a little bit far-fetched that God would do this and would pick up Har Sinai, hold on. So he says, yes, it actually didn't happen, and it's okay. It's okay to take things not literally, because they were trying to give over ideas. And he gives a very methodical Torah, a very methodical philosophy of life, of how to understand things. A lot of the things that he was writing is really making everything in the Torah eternal. And this is something that really comes up a lot in Chassidus. That, for example, the idea that Yetzias Mitzrayim is something which is relevant for every generation. That the fact that the reason that Hashem did miracles is because He wants us to understand that He is above nature, and the fact that Yetzias Mitzrayim is giving us the energy of Chirut and all of the ideas behind it, and that Pesach reveals a certain Midas HaChesed that's prevalent in the air during the Chag of Pesach, and the certain different energy which is prevalent during the holiday of Shavuot, etc., etc. So making Torah ideas to be eternal, making them to be always relevant. So this is part of this holistic view of Torah, this holistic view of Judaism. So he is really to be credited by the fact that he's giving over this deep spiritual guide to Judaism and understanding, cracking the codes of Chazal. I mean, he's really trying to explain to us what Chazal were trying to give over to us, this spiritual world, and how it connects to Torah, how it connects to mitzvot. So that's really his legacy. His legacy to us is in his Torah, and it's very, very prolific, and it's very, very. He was the one that really inspired people that we might be more familiar with, such as Rav Yitzchak Hutner, such as in our generation Rav Moshe Shapiro, Zechron Livracha, and that Rav Shapiro was obsessed with the Maharal in Prague. That's what he was always learning. That all of his classes were based in some way or another on the teachings of the Maharal in Prague. There's how to look at spirituality, how to find spirituality in life, in Torah, in mitzvahs, and I'll finish by saying that besides his Torah, so he was actually a leader in Prague, and one of the things that is brought down in his history, in his biography, is that he was not afraid to speak against the leaders of his community. And the leaders of Prague at the time, it was called the Kahal, and they were the people on the legislation. And he didn't agree with the way that they ran the city, and he made his opinions very open about how he didn't think that it was appropriate that they were only favoring the elite and favoring the rich people, and he wanted to make Torah more available to everybody else. He also didn't appreciate the way the learning was done, the way that the yeshivot were run, that he wanted to make a more a way of learning which is more simple, more focusing on just depth and deeper understanding, as opposed to just making things fancy and making things look sparkly and impressive. He was more just are you sure you understand? Are you sure that it really makes sense? And try to go deeper instead of just going associations. And so because of this, so he was actually never had an official position. That even though he's by far the most famous person in his time, so he was never the Rav until the very, very end of his life. I said before, he lived almost 100 years, until almost and he was over 80 when he finally was given a position. And the reason why he wasn't given the position is because he spoke against the legislation. And so this is he was very, very straight and very very earnest, and he wasn't afraid to speak his mind. And it's actually very interesting. I was speaking to a student the other day about not compromising your values, and he told me an interesting thing that this is a 9-word boy that I was speaking on the phone with, that in politics it's impossible to get anything done unless you're going to compromise your values. That there is no such thing, this boy was claiming, there's no such thing as making a difference in the world in politics if you're not going to compromise your values. That you're always going to have to find a line. Where is the red line that I'm not going to cross, and where is the place that it's a little bit shady, so I'm going to let it pass. But because that in order to get anything done, you have to you have to have cooperations, you have to have a what's it called? What's it called in Israel? Like the coalition, and like you're not going to necessarily agree with everything you say, but it's close enough. I'm not going to fight against it, because if I don't agree with their things, they're not going to agree with my things. And he was claiming that it's actually impossible to like if you're going to not support your biggest donors, then your biggest donors are not going to contribute, and it's impossible that every one of your donors is going to agree with you with every single thing you say. So you're going to have to be appreciative of his views that you actually don't think are actually correct. And he was claiming that it's actually impossible to get anything done in politics if you're not going to compromise your values. And I see in the Maharal Prague a model of a person that was not willing to compromise his values, and he was able to make a big difference on his people without having an official position. And I think that in this sense that he and the Ben Ish Chai were similar, and this is the legacy of both of them, that not compromising their values and not having an official position, and you're able to make an eternal mark on history if you really, really stay by your values. So they both were very, very straight, and their integrity was their guiding light, and also they were both very meaningful in bringing spirituality and mysticism into the front lines of Judaism. So their difference, their legacy to us is very, very profound, and it's we're very lucky. We're very fortunate to have such amazing leaders that we can emulate and follow in the first steps. So l'chaim, everybody. It should be a schos to all of us.